Okay. Hi, everyone. For today's session, it's today's panel. It's Thriving After Marital Trauma. Unfortunately, our moderator, Dr. Rika, wouldn't be available to join us, but replacing her is the incredible Martha Tara Lee. So before we start, I'm going to read the house rules or the rules during this session. So for the recording, we will be recording this session for those who can't make it, for you to rewatch at home at a later date, a later time. So recordings will be available for up to 30 days the moment it goes up on the cloud. So we are pinning the video so that only the presenters or the panelists will be recorded. This means you can choose to keep your video on or off at any time. If you speak, the recording will pick your audio and not your name. You can type your questions in the chat box if you prefer, and depending on the presenter or the panelists, you could private message them as well. Please keep your audio on mute whenever you're not speaking, otherwise, we might pick up your background noise. We encourage you to check out our Sugar and Spice Facebook group for latest updates and announcements. So, regarding consent, please do not contact other participants outside of the festival without their consent. You can always ask them for permission through the festival or Facebook group before messaging them. We do not want instances of participants having the feeling of being violated or unsafe during this session. So if you need emotional support, please email us at emotionalsupport@sugarandspice.asia. So I will give the floor to the amazing Martha Tarley to introduce herself as the moderator of this panel.
You. Thank you, Dani. Thanks for helping. Uh, yes, so as Dani mentioned, Dr. Rika can't make it because of bad internet, because of the typhoon in Manila. It has affected internet all over the city. So I'm moderating this panel, and actually um we had arranged it such that each presenter will only present once in the festival. But I think some things are just meant to be, because actually this panel means a lot to me, a lot. So this panel is called Thriving After Marital Trauma. And when it comes to sex, sex is usually not just in the context of one person, usually it's relational. And I think abuse is across the board in all relationships, not just in marriages. We have this title because it just happens that the two people in our panel um, have experienced marital trauma, and not just any marital trauma, long-term marital trauma, long-term. And because I knew Carol personally, and I knew that she is a woman of courage who would be willing to share vulnerably, and this would really add to the festival. I really wanted to have her. So when I talked about the topics of this festival to then my friend Karen, Karen was drawn to this topic as well, even though Karen could talk about many other topics. So we have two very brave people who have come forward with their personal stories. And I wouldn't have asked them to talk about this if I didn't feel confident that they could handle it. And so we spoke actually several times. I spoke with Karen and Carol together, and then we again met with Dr. Rika together, and I also interviewed them for the rapid fire publicity for Sugar and Spice. So very important session today that we are doing. Okay, so let me introduce a little bit about Carol Gockel. She's a confidence coach and change maker. She's an NLP practitioner and a certified style coach, and one of 100 faces of international iconic influencers by Aesthetics International in India, Singapore, and London in 2019. She's the only Singaporean chosen to co-author the book breakthrough with the world's #1 motivational speaker, Les Brown. So you can find her at carolgawker.com. And then we have Karen Evans Fu, who is an intuitive life coach working with people to gain control over their lives, empowering them to lead more fulfilling lives. So Karen has a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology and 20 years of experience in the corporate world, working in leadership and employee relations and recruitment with certificates in counseling, personal assessment, and development tools. She is a plus size community ambassador and advocate and coach with the alternative lifestyle community within Asia. She is currently residing in Bangkok, and Carol and myself are in Singapore. Yes, so without further ado, I'm sure you're more interested in our panelists and their stories. So whoever wants to go first, talk about who you are and what made you qualified for this panel, or a little bit about your story, really.
Carol, would you like to go first?
Okay, I'll do that. Thank you, Karen, and thank you, Martha, for creating this platform to allow me to share so openly. This is the first time I'm sharing in a public domain where there'll be a Q&A segment. So if you have any questions for me or for Karen, do feel free to just put it onto the chat box, and then I'll do my very best to give you the answers. Yeah, about my story. I'm just wondering, out of curiosity, right? Anyone here loves fairy tales? If you do, if you can, just give me a thumbs up on the reaction button.
Love what?
Eh? Fairy tales.
Fairy tales.
Fairy tales. Anyone love fairy tales? Yeah, I love fairy tales. Thank you so much for your reaction button. Yes, thank you. I love fairy tales as a child. Where the princesses, find their prince charming, and then they live happily ever after. I crave for the day when I find my prince and live my life of happily ever after. And growing up in a traditional Chinese family, I wasn't specifically encouraged to be more. I was told to take care of my looks, so I would be deemed a good wife material to my future husband's family. I should only speak when I'm spoken to, and that my identity as a woman, as female, will be determined by how well I marry. And the message stuck on my mind was, if I'm not pretty, if I'm not meek, if I'm too outspoken, then I'm unworthy and unwanted. So during my adolescent years, I was that really tall and skinny and tan girl that really didn't quite fit in. And I wasn't academically smart either. So my parents would always tell me that, the good grades my cousins were getting in school, and that, my job was to look pretty. And then things changed for the worse when I turned 15. And going through puberty, my face was covered in painful cystic acne, and almost overnight, my looks were gone, and confidence went down to zero. And then people would comment about how bad I looked. I felt really inferior, and I was very desperate to be loved. So I seek validation externally, and I married the first person who made me felt wanted, made me felt visible. And the first person who told me that I was beautiful. However, we really struggled financially, and he was eventually made a bankrupt. And he said the best way to make money is through business. So the money I made at that time in my job would go into the business, and it would go into servicing our matrimonial home. Unfortunately, he didn't stay faithful in our 10 years of marriage. He would start, commenting negatively on my hair, my makeup, my dressing, and then how small my eyes were. Then he would say, find a way to make them bigger so you look prettier in photos. And then he would say, your breasts are too small. Find a way to make them look fuller. Wear push-up bras, perhaps. So, he would tell me things like pretty girls dress sexily. And then so I actually forced to somehow, in order to agree with him, then I started dressing in clothing that I didn't like. It made me felt really, really vulgar. And I didn't like myself. and I actually underwent double eyelid surgery in order to look to become the woman that he has in his mind. And I actually gotten breast implants as well as the result in order to be accepted so that he'll approve of me. But however, I didn't feel beautiful. I saw a stranger looking back at me in the mirror every single day. I felt slutty, vulgar. I hated myself. And he would say, I'm your family now. Your parents and friends are holding you back. I don't like them. So I cut ties with all of them. One day, he said, I made some really bad trade decisions. I need to sell our apartment to repay the debt. I said yes. So we rented a place while waiting for the sale of our matrimonial home to go through. 2 days after the sale came through, I went to the ATM to withdraw money to buy groceries. I couldn't withdraw $100. I wondered why. Then I checked the balance of my bank account to find out I was left with $3.08 in the account. The entire profits from the sale of the apartment, my entire life saving, my salary that I received were completely gone. Suddenly, I felt my breast short, my heart felt tight. I started to feel faint. With trembling hands, I called him to ask what happened to the money. He said, the marriage isn't working. I want a divorce. It hit me there, then, and immediately I felt unwanted, unloved, and unworthy. I had no way to feed myself, and I soon will be homeless because I had no way to pay rent. My mind went blank. I didn't know how I got back to the apartment. I remember being in the kitchen with the kitchen knife, staring at the blade, and I didn't even have the courage to stab myself with it. I remember somehow being in my room. I drew the curtains, I laid down, hoping that everything was a bad dream. Now I'll go to sleep. Maybe I will die of hunger in my sleep. For 3 days, I drifted in and out of consciousness. I curled up naked on bed, wishing I was dead. I cried till I passed out. Then a voice rang in my head. If you die, he wins. So after that, I felt a sharp pain in my stomach as I struggled to get up. I sunk to my knees and crawled slowly to the toilet. And when I saw myself in the mirror, I couldn't recognize myself. I looked grayish. I had dark circles under my eyes, and my eyelids were really swollen, it was half closed. My lips were so dry, it was completely cracking. Well, later I found out that starving for 3 days wasn't enough to kill me. But the first thing I did was to remove my breast implants, and I told myself I still have my job. I worked hard, reconnected with my families and friends, found a coach to help me get through, and found new love for myself. And I finally regained my identity as a person. And most importantly is I was able to get out of it through support, and I'm very grateful for that. And today I'm remarried again. Gokul is my married name. My husband's German, and I have 2 beautiful children. I'm blessed that I didn't kill myself, and so that experience gave me the push to do what I want to do right now, to support women in their success, to help women who have gone through trauma, who didn't have any confidence, to really to rediscover their confidence so that they can recover and uncover the inner beauty. So yeah, so that's my story.
Thank you, Carol. Karen, do you want to go next? Sorry, I was on mute.
Hi, everyone. My name is Karen. I'm 50 this year, so you can imagine how many years of things I have gone through. I have lots of stories to tell, but I will tell them in a nutshell, if possible. I grew up in a family where abuse was seen. My parents were divorced since I was extremely young. I was about 3-4 years old. But even then, I remember the times when I have witnessed my parents fighting, or rather my father hitting my mother. There was even a time I remember when I was 5 years old where my father literally pinned my mother on the bed because he thought she was seeing somebody else, even though they were already separated. And he was hitting her while I was in the bed with them. So that was one of my earliest experiences of witnessing abuse as a child. So growing up as well, but also being a typical Asian family, children are often punished by being caned. But the caning went beyond just punishment. It was a way my father vented his anger as well. So from a very young age, I was exposed to a lot of abuse, and I saw how my father was a rather abusive man. But I also saw how my mother reacted and how she preserved herself to stay sane. And so from there, I sort of learned subconsciously what it meant to be in a abusive environment. So moving forward, fast forwarding to when I was in my early 20s, I was in university. I met my then my first husband. I met him in my third year of university. I only had one more year left to go. And I met him when I was back in Singapore during the school vacation time. And we continued throughout the whole summer. And before I left to go back to school, he declared that he was very much in love with me and that he wanted to marry me. So we got engaged thereafter. I was young, so it was one of those things where I just said, "Yeah, okay." It's very nice, as the Carol mentioned, fairy tales, right? So it was a nice fairy tale story. I was dating a few people at the time, but he was the one that was serious enough to want to marry me. So I went back to university in the US and continued on for the year. And it was a long-term relationship, a long-distance relationship. I went to visit him when he was having his school holidays. But that was when I discovered that he was cheating. I gave him another chance to let him repent, so to speak. And then things went on well. We came back to Singapore, we started working together, and we both then decided to get married after an incident had happened with our jobs, because we were both working with the same boss. So when we got married, it wasn't really for the right reason. I married because I kept a promise to marry him if we ever came back to Singapore again. And so I did. There's another story behind that story, but that's for another day. So in the beginning, he was a very lovely man. He sounded like he was ambitious. He had ideals. And technically, he came from a very good background. His family checked my background to make sure that I was a suitable wife before allowing us to continue. And things were all right. We progressed on as if we were a normal, so to speak, husband. He was a little possessive. He wasn't someone who made friends easily, so oftentimes I was his social contact, so to speak. And things were okay until we was about to we were thinking about having children, but for some reason I kind of sort of held back a bit because he was at times violent. It got to a point where sometimes he got so lonely and frustrated at work that he would then take things out on me. We often would have fights. And sometimes the fights got a little bit physical, but it was nothing ever that was massive, so to speak. Until at one point he was extremely insecure. And I was working at the time for this retail outlet where some of my male colleagues were very good looking. And so because I had very good looking male colleagues in the store, he started getting very insecure. And what then happened was that he started sending me lots of flowers at work. So all my female colleagues were super sort of envious, right? Wow, your husband's so nice. He sends you flowers all the time. And I said, oh yeah, okay, flowers are nice, but it's not because he wants to tell me he loves me, or in a way, yes, he was. But it was other more sinister reasons. But as far as my female colleagues were concerned, wow, he's such a wonderful husband. And so he will often tell me that, see, I'm such a good husband. I send you flowers all the time. But what had happened was that there was one evening where I was out with my colleagues and he saw how I was interacting with my male colleagues and he wasn't happy about it. So after my colleagues left, we went home. Next thing I know, my husband was drinking a lot. And next thing I know, he's pounced upon me and strangled me. So I tried to fight him off, but I couldn't. He was quite a large guy. I couldn't fight him off in the end. He strangled me. I almost passed out. And at one point, when he finally realized that I really could not breathe any longer, he then rolled off me. And that's when I leapt up and finally got out of the house and ran to a police station. Now, at the police station, I then filed my reports. Because I don't bruise easily, the police couldn't see any bruises on my neck, on the rest of my body, on my breasts, where he was very, very rough with me. And they said, who can you call? So I called my father. So father came down, he picked me up, brought me home. He said, go to sleep. And I said, okay, fine. So I went to sleep. So the next morning, my dad came into the room and said, right, get up now, get ready. I'm sending you home. And I looked at him and I said, you're sending me home to my husband? And he said, yes, he is your husband. Now imagine how it feels like for your father to send you back to the man who just tried to kill you. So I was very shocked. I was subconsciously, I felt as if I was so worthless that, my place as a wife was only that of like almost a man's property that he can do as he wish. And so the man whom is supposed to be the person who protected me the most ended up the person sending me back to my abuser. So from then onwards, I then was always on guard to make sure that I didn't have anything that would give him any reason to be suspicious. But of course, he had lots of insecurities. And so whenever, when I changed jobs, he would often call to check on me to make sure that I wasn't out anybody. I was actually in the office. Sometimes he'll call 5-6 times in a row. And I was asking, what is it that you want? He says, oh, nothing, I'm just bored. So that was the kind of some example of some mental torture or mental abuse that he did on me. And it got to a point where it was so bad, even my boss was asking, why is your husband calling so many times for? I'm like, I don't know. But it also then meant that I wanted to spend as little time with him as possible. Because we did at one point talk about having children, in order to do my duty as a wife, I, of course, then would have sex with him, reluctantly, but I would. And so then I was also pregnant with our first child. I thought that things would be better after having my first kid. But no, he felt that child rearing was actually a mother's job. He had no involvement. And even though my son was quite a sickly child at birth, he rarely helped. Now, my son had some problems with keeping his food down. So he constantly would throw up after drinking his milk. And I have to do that 3-4 times in a row just for one session of feeding to ensure that he has enough food in his stomach. But imagine every time you feed him and you sit him up and he starts vomiting all over you again. So that was very, very stressful emotionally and mentally and physically. But he had nothing to do with it. He wanted nothing to do with it. And he said, that's your job, right? He said, how come you can't handle this? Why is it that our son is so unhealthy? He's not normal. He's got so many health issues. And he all pointed it all back at me. So that kind of abuse was very, very difficult. It made me feel like I was a failure, not only as a woman, but as a mother. So that didn't help very much. So shortly after, I started sort of backing away from him, and I emotionally started distancing myself with him. And even though I I tried to spend a little time with him as possible, whenever we are together at home, he would turn on the emotional blackmail, saying that as a wife, you should be letting me have sex with you. You should be the one to entertain me, to keep me company. Your friends are not important. Why you need friends for? You only just need me. And the thing is that he does have only very, very few friends, but they're always hanging out with him because he likes to be the one buying all the beers. So in a way, he knew that, and he was very lonely. So he expected me to fulfill his emotional needs in that way too. And all that became too much, and I started distancing myself emotionally, and all the more so, I didn't want to have anything to do with him. I would literally sleep on the edge of the bed so that I don't even have to touch him, even by accident. And then what he would do was that he would then look for books that talks about sexless marriages and say, read it. And I asked him, have you read it? He said, I don't need to read it. You're the one who doesn't want to have sex with me. You read it. You should then know what is it like to not have sex in a marriage, right? And that kind of blackmail was too much to take. But I didn't really care any longer. I just didn't want to have him even touch me. And therefore, subconsciously, I then switched off my sexuality. I had did everything I could, well, subconsciously, to look nothing like a feminine woman. I shut everything off. I hid all my curves. I basically switched off my femininity altogether. And my so-called reason in a way, or my purpose of then continuing to move on and continue this relationship with him is because of my children, my kids. So we did eventually go for marital counseling. After I threatened to leave him, he then finally broke down and said, fine, we'll go for marital counseling, and we did. But the counseling didn't work out. He was upset that the therapist indirectly agreed with some of the points that I raised. And he stormed out of the therapy session and never came back again. And so to me, that was a sign that, right, this marriage really is over. However, as part of the really giving it a go and working on the marriage during the therapy, I agreed to have sex with him. And so because of that, what happened was I then was pregnant with my second child. So for the sake of my children, I just continued on with the relationship. I then sought shelter or relief by going back to church. And as you know, in church, they don't approve of divorce. So that doesn't help. So I tried to do everything I could to try and ensure that the marriage was still intact, whether it was a happy one or not, that it was still intact. The turning point for me was when, after all the years of physical abuse, mental abuse, emotional abuse, my mother was helping me to watch my children when I was at work. And many times I said to my mother, what should I do? I really want to leave him, but I feel like I can't. And what she will always say, and she will also say this immediately or while we were fighting, my husband and I fighting, she will often say, give in. Give in. He's your husband. Just give in and just be over and done with. Right? Let him do what he wants to do and just let him be. And so there was one time where he hit me so badly and that my son saw the whole situation, that my mother finally said, fine, leave him, leave him. Only then that I felt I had like the approval and support to then file for divorce, and I did. So we were together for 14 years, right? So lasting 14 years of this kind of abuse was just too much. But I felt at the time that I did it for the sake of my children. So I had the whole martyr syndrome. You know, I'm the good person. I'm sacrificing myself so that I can protect my children. It's a good thing, but it's not exactly a good thing, because then I sacrificed myself. And what I didn't realize then was that in sacrificing myself this way, it was actually detrimental to my children, not beneficial for them. And so when I finally said, okay, right, it's time for me to file divorce, I finally came to understand or realize that being an unhappy wife and mother and being abused and having my children witness the abuse is not good for them. I think it'll be healthier and beneficial for them if I was happy, even if I was divorced, right? So when the mother's happy, the children would tend to be a little happier. They tend to feel a bit more secure. And so when that realization hit me, it was a game changer for me. And I checked again with my pastors in church. So although the pastor did say, although officially, as the church, we can't condone divorce. However, if the guy is beating the shit out of you, leave the guy. So with that, I took it as some sort of like a permission to say, okay, it's okay for me to leave him. And so I filed for the divorce. But during the filing of the divorce, because he's very, very, face conscious, appearances matter a lot to him, that he fought all the way. Even to the bitter end, on the day of the divorce itself in front of the judge, he wanted to have the last word and to declare that I just want it on record that I love my wife very much. That was supposed to be the last sentence. So the abuse went on even till then. So after the divorce was finalized, I finally had a chance to breathe. I actually then, one evening, broke down and cried in the bathroom. And all I could think of was, even though I was the one who filed for a divorce, I felt like a failure. A failure as a woman, a failure as a wife, a failure as a mother. And I cried and I basically cursed God. I yelled at him. I said, how can you let me go through this, right? You're supposed to be God. You're supposed to be a loving father, but you're letting me go through all this shit. Why? And so then I declared, I was like, no, if this is meant to happen for a reason, fine. But the next man that better come my way better be a good man with a good heart, someone who can take care of me and allows me to take care of him, will respect me, and I'll be able to respect the person. And I had a little laundry list I told God, say, look, this is what I want in my next marriage. I've suffered enough. 14 years is a long time. I think I deserve someone better moving forward. So after that, I didn't think about it again. In order for me to gain back some sort of self-esteem and sense of self-worth, I did something that wasn't exactly the best thing to do, which was to start dating with a vengeance. I reclaimed my sexuality. I bought myself nice lingerie. I bought myself clothing. I got my hair done nicely. I learned how to do my makeup again, and so really put myself out there. And as I said, I revenge dated. Right, I dated as much as I could. And in that process, of course, not all were happy outcomes per se. I met some lovely people. I've met some people who in the end, I helped save their marriage instead. And it was interesting. And I said, I need to move forward. I can't stay in one corner and say I'm a loser, I'm a victim, and that's it. I couldn't allow myself to continue living a life that was like as if I was a zombie, that I was worth nothing. I refused to, even though technically speaking, I'm actually trained in psychology. I should know all these things, and I do know them up here, right? I know all the stuff up here, what I need to do, what I ought to do, what I have to do, but actually doing it's a very different story. And so I said, it's time to practice what I preach. And so I did. I put myself out there. And in that process of not exactly actively looking for my next husband and actively dating, that's when I actually met my current husband, where we both initially had no intention of remarrying. He was also in another marriage. And so we were both dating very casually. It was very unexpected that both of us fell in love. And we just celebrated our 12th-year wedding anniversary just this past weekend. He's a very good man, the complete opposite to my husband, very caring, very, very respectful. And we have very, very open communication, which is the complete opposite of my marriage, my first marriage. We rarely communicated. And when we did, it was basically about the children and his complaints and taunts at how bad a mother I was. And so I made sure that in the recovery process, the healing process, when I was actively dated, I actually deliberately then went to take up classes. I went for image classes. I went to various healing workshops, how to deal with heartbreak, how to deal with breakups, what you need to do in order to be a better person, so to speak. All the attempts to increase my sense of self-worth and my self-esteem. And also, it didn't help very much that I'm a plus size woman. Okay, I'm not your usual standard slim, slender Asian woman. I'm a big girl, right? So that was another thing I had to deal with, and I had to slowly overcome that and accept my body for what it was, for what it is, and curves and all. And so it was a very steep learning curve, but I decided it was necessary. I had to be brave enough to do it. If I was brave enough to leave my husband, my first husband, and brave enough to do what I need to do to protect my children, then I can do this, right? I can learn to accept my curves, being a plus size woman. So 14 years is a long time to be in an abusive relationship. And people have asked me, you're trained in psychology. Why did you allow yourself to be in an abusive relationship for so long? Why? It doesn't make sense. You're a smart woman, you're a strong person, you're very brave, you're very intelligent. Why are you in such a destructive marriage? And for such a long time? And I told them, there was various many reasons. It wasn't financial because I was actually the main breadwinner in the family. There was more of societal expectations, right? Parents' approval, also approval from church, approval from people, and I hated the fact that I could be thought of as a failure, and therefore it made me subconsciously refuse to admit that I lost, right, by filing for divorce. I refused. I wanted to stop feeling that it was a shameful thing, right, to be in a divorce. My mother made me feel very ashamed for having gone through having a divorce, even though she herself is divorced. And so, dealing with my parents' expectations of me, and dealing with society's expectations of me, dealing with my children's expectations of me was a lot to handle. And I decided that it was necessary for me to do what I needed to do to heal and move forward. So when I remarried, one of the first things I did was when I first came across a workshop that said how to overcome your fears on relationships. And I figured, this is my second marriage. I don't want to fuck it up. So I think I better go and learn how to have a proper relationship, right? Because clearly I wasn't doing something right. I was in a miserable, abusive relationship. Clearly there's something I'm missing. So I did. And that was the beginning of my journey to heal myself, to really heal all the hurt and pain and the trauma that I went through. abuse is not easy to recover from. Don't let anyone try to make you believe that you can just overcome it just like that. You'll get over it. Like, move on. Yeah, move on. How? How do you move on? Is it easy to move on? It's not as easy as people say it is. It does take courage, and I've had to face myself squarely in the face and say, look, this is your dark side. This is a side that you're ashamed of. This is a side that you are afraid of. And I had to make a decision that I can't just live like that. I have to deal with my dark side. I have to deal with my pain. I have to deal with my mistakes, and learn and move on from that. So, was that enough a nutshell? A very big nutshell. If anyone who wants to ask me questions, they can. I think I'd rather do that than for me to ramble on some more. Martha?
Just a moment. Okay. So yes, thank you for both of you giving in a nutshell sharing of what happened in your two long-term relationships. For Carol it was 10, for Karen it was 14, and so Karen already answered the question of why she stayed as long as she did, because this is a commonly asked question. When you are in a toxic, abusive relationship, a lot of people who are just basically uninformed or ignorant, they will say, why did it take you so long? So Karen already answered it, which is she was looking for approval and she didn't want to be a failure. So for Carol, I know I asked you this before and I'm going to ask you again. If he didn't leave you, would you have left him?
The truth is, no, I wouldn't have. It had crossed my mind when I thought I couldn't deal with it anymore. All the lies, he cheated on me as well during the whole 10 years of marriage, plus 3 years of dating, so total 13 years. Because I was conditioned to think that marriage is forever. And I hung on to the fact that I wanted that happily ever after. So I told myself, if I didn't work hard enough to maintain this marriage, then I don't want to leave and turn back and regret. So I stuck onto the marriage vow as well, for better or for worse. And also there was this shame. There's this shame that's highly attached to me, because my identity at that time was I am Mrs. So-and-so. So if I left, then I will be no one. I will be nobody. I'm worthless. So it was all of that. And not because I loved him that much. I mean, thinking back, not because I was head over heels and I loved him so deeply that I couldn't live without him. It was because of my own personal confidence and the fear of the unknown, and also shame. And most part of it was also because financially, because I was the sole breadwinner at that time, because we were running a business. All of my money, my salary went into that, and he had total full control of the expenses at home. So how it started was, he was saying that, you know what, right now, if you thinking back, it was actually lies. He would say things like, you just continue doing what you do. I'm the man of the house. I will take care of you. So yes, right now you're the one bringing home the bread, but it's okay. When the business will start to strive, we will be earning a lot of money, then I will be the one to take care of you. So don't worry, let me manage it for you. I'll handle it. This is what men do. So I stuck onto that and allow my power. I gave my power to him. So that was the reason why I couldn't leave, because I didn't know how to handle my money. I didn't know how to take care of myself financially. And the irony is, the whole marriage ended because he took the money away. He literally emptied my account.
So what happened when he left you with $3? What did you do?
I plucked up the courage finally after a few days and called my friend up. One of the closest, in fact, she wasn't even close. She's close. She's one of my closest girlfriend now. She was the only person that I knew who went through a divorce. And I pour my heart out to her and I say, I am left penniless. And I shamelessly asked for a loan. And I was able to get a few $100, to survive at the end of the month. And I was able to, go up to my boss and ask for an advance in order to to pay rent, and then actually to feed myself.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, and really thank both of you. So I just want to summarize some of the things that you all said, because it's actually really succinct. I know actually both of you have spent some time to think about what you want to share during this panel. So actually, it's really what you are getting are the shorter version, even though it may seem long, it's actually the shortest version, because this was actually over a long period of time. Okay, so I want to summarize what was said, which is the dream of the marriage, that marriage is a fairy tale, that it is meant for forever, and because of the vows that we make and us holding on to those vows. So if a marriage ends, it's because then it's called a failed marriage, and because it's a failed marriage, then that must mean you are a failure. So nobody likes to be a failure, and you must have failed because you didn't work hard enough. And while you're in it, you might as well work as hard as you can, and you don't want to have any regrets. And then there's also the possible shame, and how it's tied with your identity, your finances, your kids, and your community and your religion. So I also want to highlight what Carol shared, which is when you are in a long-term abusive relationship, it actually erodes away in your confidence and in your sense of reality. And they've broken you down so much and probably brainwash you so much that you don't even know what is right and wrong anymore. In fact, it's easier to just not think and keep your head down. And it's kind of a game for such abusers to also keep you on your tiptoes, because that's, I don't know, that's their entertainment. So yeah, that's my summary of the things that you all shared. So this is really, really full on. However, as a sexologist, since this is a sex festival, when all this abuse is going on, I know for Karen, this affected your sex drive. You didn't want to have sex with him. You didn't want to touch him to touch you, but you did it anyway because you wanted to save the marriage, because of religion, because you were told you needed to do it, because you were blamed to do it. What about you, Carol?
Yeah, well, I use sex and my body as a way to try to keep my man. So every time after a fight, I would literally crawl and be totally shameless, and then try to tease him sexually, so that I will keep him. Thinking back right now, that was the worst time of my life, because sex itself wasn't pleasurable for me as a person. And in that marriage, I was using this as in a way to manipulate him so that he will not leave me. And in a way that I told myself, if I were to satisfy him sexually, then he would not have eyes for other women. Yeah.
But on hindsight,
Mhm.
on hindsight, do you think it was sex that the lack of sex or the lack of good sex that resulted in both your partners cheating?
I don't believe so. Well, things like when I married him, I was sexually inexperienced. He had quite a few sexual encounters, as well as girlfriends before me. So it could be the inexperience that actually contributed to it, but I was willing to try because in a way I felt that I was like the baby in or the child in our marriage. So he was like a parent. So there's this parent and child dynamic that was happening, and he was teaching me stuff, and I was willing to learn. And I was willing to learn not because I was open to explore, was because I wanted to please my man. So I did what I was told, but I didn't any bit they actually enjoy the entire whole process. Sex was a duty at that time, but I was willing to try different things. With toys, he suggested anal as well, but it couldn't happen because I just couldn't get through with it. Yeah. So things like all the bedroom stuff, like sexy lingerie, handcuffs, whips, we tried that.
Thank you for sharing. Karen, is there anything you'd like to add? Because you did have sex with your husband even when you didn't feel like it. Do you feel that in any shape or form that actually that prevents somebody from cheating?
Cheating for me is actually not, for me anyway, it's not a matter of just the sex. For both men and women, I think there's also a large component of the emotional side of things as well. For a lot of men, I think it's largely an ego thing, in my opinion. For me, I didn't do anything for him sexually per se. Although I have to say, early on in the beginning of the relationship with him, we were very sexually adventurous, so to speak. In fact, I was the one who was a lot more experienced than he was, and so we did have a lot of sex, and a lot of very interesting sex. No toys at that point in time, but nonetheless, we did have a lot of fun times right at the beginning. For me, it was when the emotional toil came in, when all the emotional abuse came in, all the stress of the marriage came in. That's when my sexuality just shut down. I didn't want to have anything to do with him. My emotions were just not there. I didn't feel the desire to be with him at all. I still had sexual desires. I still had needs, but I was in a situation where I couldn't, and I didn't feel like I could even to have an affair, even if I wanted one. I didn't have the time or the capacity. But yeah, for me, it was very difficult because from being a very sexual person, I literally had to switch off. And when I did have sex with him, it got to a point where it's like he would beg for it, or so to speak, emotionally blackmail me into it, and I'll agree to it. And sometimes I'll agree to it because I know it will end very quickly, literally like in 2 minutes, literally. So I would then just say, I put up with it for the 2 minutes, just grit my teeth. The lights are off anyway. He can't see my face. Just like get it over and done with. And many times I just felt really disgusted at myself because I allowed myself to basically be a semen dumping place, almost like a garbage point, a refuse, a place where he can just use me as a human sex toy and just come and be done with it. He literally would then roll over and go to sleep. So I would also then I'll get up and wash and so on and so forth. But in that process, I was feel really, really disgusted, and that dampened my desire to even want to have sex with him even more. So because of the fact that the belief that I should still provide, that I ought to be still giving him sex, that kind of pressure sort of made me say yes every once in a while. It would be very infrequent, in fact, very rare towards the end of our marriage. But sometimes emotional blackmail just got too much, and I just said, no, fuck it. Just turn over and let him do what he wants and just be done with it. So yeah, it was tough. It was tough.
Yeah, and so I like what you said, that sex is not just sex. Sex is also power, and so for Carol is you know there are people who say make up sex is the best sex, and by Carol, you having sex with him, I think that was that comfort of, we are okay as long as we're having sex. And I think for Karen, it was to keep the peace, to do what you needed to do. So I find it fascinating that both of you have similar stories, but actually different. Same, different. Yeah. This is so sensitive. I am feeling really affected actually from your stories, and I can see from the audience who have video on, actually this is emotionally really difficult to hear, but I think it's important for us to realize the complexities of the issues of people in marriages and wanting it to succeed. Call it love, call it power, call it institutional stuckness. We really hold on to something that is dysfunctional for many reasons. So, having said all that, now that we know your story, of course, we want to know the happily ever after. And you started to share how you worked on yourself, and both of you went for courses and faced the dark side and came through at the end of it. So for me, I want to ask, when you were still going through that phase of finding yourself, how was your relationship with sexuality? Because I know, Karen, you said you went on revenge dating, makeup sex, or whatever you call it. How did that make you feel, though? And then, Carol, what happened to your sexuality when you were going through your healing?
When I said revenge dating, yeah, I revenge dated and I also had revenge sex. It was as if I had finally had a chance to reawaken my sexuality. Because it went to sleep. It was dormant for so long, and it was very liberating. I won't say I was sleeping around per se, but yeah, I did have quite a fair bit of sex. It's just to be able to help me reconnect with my body. I would say that I can't say that I didn't regret some of the encounters I had, but nonetheless, they were part and parcel of me rediscovering myself, allowing myself to finally rediscover what was it that really excited me, what was it that was important to me, how did it feel like again to finally really enjoy sex, in reconnecting with my body. That was the most interesting thing. Maybe not have been the most appropriate approach to have taken, but it helped me in one way or the other. So
yes. So I know you shared what you did, but I wanted to know how you felt.
How I felt was I felt liberated.
Okay.
I felt really liberated. To finally be able to really express myself as a woman in that particular way.
Yeah. And I feel that society is such that women need to be a certain way, but actually by being the bad girl and allowing ourselves to do what we want to do or what we need to do, actually is a form of healing as well. I think people forget that. So, Carol, how about yourself? So when you, was working through things before you found your husband, how was your sexuality?
Well, on the contrary, because I had used my body, to try to maintain the marriage that was failing. After it all ended, I felt really, really dirty. Even though, emotionally, my ex cheated on me. I don't know whether if he actually ended up sleeping with other women during the course of our marriage. The whole idea that I was using my body to try to keep him, I felt really cheap. I felt like a slut, that I was using myself. I hated my body. I hated myself actually at that time. So on the contrary, I didn't go on to try to rediscover my sexuality. I dated, but the thing is, like, I was very refrained. I want to make sure that I don't get promiscuous. Though even though internally I felt like I wanted to, but I was kind of controlled. Thinking back, I'm not sure because I was being rational, because I was afraid of catching sexually transmitted disease. I didn't want the whole thing of this mindless, without emotion one night stands, even though I could have. So my girlfriend said, you know what, it's okay, just go and rediscover, see what you like, because you have been this submissive wife, and then you don't really know what you want sexually as a woman. Go and explore, and it's fine, make sure that it's safe, right? And they're encouraging, but I couldn't go through it because I felt dirty internally. And I was able to finally say maybe I would try. And I would say I was quite lucky, and I met somebody who, it was a rebound for both of us. Then he actually helped me through that relationship. It was very short, for just a few months, and he helped me through. And then I finally was able to reconnect to myself, to my body, to really love my body again. As I mentioned earlier, the first thing that I did was I removed my breast implants, because I just couldn't stand it that when people were talking to me, they were looking at my breast and not my face. So that, when that went away, I was able to really love my body and look at my body in a different way. I felt normal, and then I felt beautiful, not because somebody told me that I was beautiful, but actually the feeling that I got from this short-term rebound relationship actually helped me. And of course, on top of that, I had counseling as well. So this helped, and also being able to finally talk about the whole situation, the whole failed marriage, or failed relationship, and the whole emotional abuse for the whole 13 years of my life with my girlfriends. I felt liberated after that. Yeah. So I think the most important thing is for me was being able to get reconnected to my body and loving my body. There was this particular incident that I actually took off all my clothes and stood in front of my wardrobe, and it had mirror on the front, and I really look at myself, and all the things that my ex said that he didn't like about my body, I decided to say, no, you didn't like my breast, I'm happy with it. This is what I was born with. The only thing that I couldn't change was the plastic surgery that I had done on my eyelids. That was irreversible. But other than that, I was able to reclaim my identity as a woman. And because of that relationship, I was able to be more confident. I also explore myself sexually through masturbation as well.
Thank you for sharing. So both of you subsequently met your current husband, and Carol, you have 2 kids with your current husband, and Karen, you raised your 2 kids with your current husband. So how is sex and sexuality like in this marriage now?
Well, for me, what I've learned from the whole incident was openness, open communication. Yeah. So I was because I found myself rediscover my own worth as a woman and my own personal sexuality. Then I was able to compliment. I was able to ask, not demand, but ask, and have open communication with my current partner, my current husband. So sexually, I'm pretty happy with that.
We are interested in the sex. This is a sex festival.
Yes, it is. So we experiment, but the thing is, you see, the experiment is a bit different because it's like we're both consensual, right? So the mindset is completely different. But previously was because I wanted to please and I wasn't enjoying it.
Yeah, that's so important.
Yeah.
Thank you. Karen?
Sorry, you wanted me to talk about the sex aspect of it?
Like with your new relationship.
In my new relationship, I would say I was finally able to allow myself to ask for what is it I wanted. In fact, it was based on what I discovered about myself, or rather came to allow myself to admit again that this is who I am as a person, sexually. I then sought out people who had similar ideas about what sex ought to look like or what it would like to be. So actually was through a specific website where people share the same ideals and ideas rather and desires, where I found my husband actually, my second husband. So I think the word liberated still remains. I was very happy that I could finally be who I really am and be able to fully express myself sexually without any reservation, any judgment, without anyone shaming me per se. My preferences are not exactly everybody's cup of tea. I wouldn't exactly go and tell my parents this is what I'd like to do, but I don't deny. If people ask me what is it that I am into, I'm happy to tell them. But yeah, liberated is definitely the word I would still use.
Thank you for sharing. Do you want to share what site? Because you mentioned.
It is a website that actually the website now is no longer that active. There's now much better websites for it, but at the time it was the only website around that was catered to those who are into the alternative lifestyle.
I see. Thank you for sharing. Okay, so I want to ask whether you the different types of abuse and how can people who are watching this or who know of people who are going through such toxic, abusive relationships, how can they get safe?
People tend to think that abuse, when you hear of abusive relationships, people think of being having had physical abuse. So when you think of abuse, you think of someone being strangled, someone being hit, slapped, kicked, being shoved, hair pulling. People think that only when things like this happen, then it's called an abusive relationship. In actual fact, it is one of the types of abusive relationships. But to be abused mentally and emotionally is something that, because there is no scars, there are no bruises, there's no bleeding, no nothing to visibly show that the abuse is happening. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Emotional abuse is just as bad as physical abuse. The scars, I would say, remain far deeper and longer than physical abuse. So yes, my body has the trauma, and I've had to work with releasing the physical memories of the trauma of being strangled and hit. But there was the emotional aspect of it that was far more difficult to let go of and to deal with. So mental abuse, emotional abuse, and as I said, it could be emotional blackmail. If you love me, you'll do this, 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 and that. So that's something that typically, when someone's emotionally blackmailing you, if you love me, you'll do this for me. If you want me to be happy, you'll do this for me, right? For mental abuse, why is it that you can't do this? Why can't you be like that person? Why is it that guy's wife is so nice and can do this and can do that and blah blah blah? Or she's a mother too. Why can't you be like that? Why can't you raise our children like this? Why can't your children be born normal like theirs? Things like that. So that kind of abuse is quite severe and is extremely stressful. From physical abuse, you can actually say, well, at some point the bruises heal, the bones can heal. But emotional abuse and mental abuse is not something that can easily just rub an ointment or put a splint around it and make it go away eventually. Those are things that you need to actively work on, to face it head on, to admit fully how you felt. Not what society thinks that you should be thinking or feeling, but how you actually feel. There were times when I would even sometimes make myself feel better by saying that I'm the one who's sacrificing myself for the sake of my children. Right? It made me feel, in a way, justified for suffering through all this nonsense, because it was for the sake of my children. It was for the sake of being a good wife. And so that was something that was not, it's not something to be proud of, to admit, to deal with. the secret payoff, as some people call it, is that because you're in an abusive relationship and people know that you're in an abusive relationship, and then because of that, sometimes people pay attention to you. Oh, poor thing. And oh, how can you put up with that? Isn't that's horrible? If you need a listening ear, I'm here to listen to you. That kind of attention was nice. It wasn't a deliberate attempt to get attention subconsciously, because I was lacking. I was deeply. I didn't have any emotional support. I didn't have any. I didn't feel loved. I didn't have the sense of security. I didn't have the attention from loving attention. And so when people showed me any attention or showed me any concern, it felt good, albeit for the wrong reason. And I had to admit that to myself, that was what I was doing at some point too. But having said that, at that time, it was a self-preservation attempt, right, to keep myself sane so I wouldn't go crazy. But it's not easy to deal with. And I encourage people to, if you know that somebody is going through a physical abusive relationship or an emotional abusive relationship, help them. Ask them if you offer them help. If anything, let them know that there are certain professionals who are able to help you. And especially for those who know of people, or if you are currently going through a physical abuse situation, that is something then I would encourage you to go talk to professionals. Family Services Center from the Ministry of Health. There are many professionals there who can help you if you need to get a personal protection order because the person is hitting you a lot and abusing you physically a lot, and you fear for your safety, you fear for your children's safety. Go to the police, go to the Family Services Center, go to AWARE, go to PAVE. There are quite a few organizations that can help you. And things like applying for a personal protection order, they can help you apply for it because it actually has to be applied through the family court. But these organizations can help you file for it, and it will be helpful too if you have a police report. So if the incident has caused you some bruises, some physical damage, if a doctor can take photos, or you can take photos and have a doctor check it out and verify that you actually have those injuries, then with that and with the police report, they will then make your case even faster to be processed. So there is such a thing as an expedited personal protection order, where if you know your life is in danger, immediately they can then ensure that the judge will issue the order immediately so that you can then be protected immediately. And if that person breaches that personal protection order, that person can literally be thrown in jail. So don't be afraid to use it. It is for, especially, if you really feel that your safety is compromised. It's not easy to go do that. So if you are the friend of this person who's being abused, help them if you can. If you have the capacity, help them, bring them to the police station, stay with them. If you can, if you're able to, let them have a space to stay at for a short while as a temporary shelter if you can. If not, there are actual shelters they can go to, like AWARE. They can and PAVE. They have access to places where you can have physical shelter to keep you safe if necessary. So it is our society, especially in our Asian society, in fact, anywhere actually, the whole thing about being shamed for being abused, for being hit, that is something that you have to understand. I don't think you choose to be hit, right? Unless you do, then it's a different story. But if you didn't choose to be hit, right, you are being abused. Please know that, especially in Singapore now, if you're in Singapore, the police are now more trained to be more aware and more sensitive. There are various many government organizations who are now more trained and aware to handle the situation. If you need to get the police to help you immediately, literally call for the police to come to your home. Don't be afraid to do that. It's better for you to call them, and then they can intervene on your behalf and take you away if necessary to help save you, and do it. Right? Your safety is important. There's nothing shameful about it, especially if you have children. It is their safety too. If you are not safe, they are not safe. Even if the abuser does not abuse the children, the fact is that if you're the children's parent, there is a chance that the venting may happen onto them. So it'd be good for you to make sure that you take care of you. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Karen. So we only have 15 more minutes and there are 2 more questions. Is there anything that, Carol, you'd like to add very quickly to the types of abuse and how people can keep safe?
Yeah. Well, the thing is, like, what I wanted to share is, like, usually psychological, emotional abuse could be a precursor to physical abuse. One of the biggest push for me to come out to share my story in the first place was because after ending our marriage, my ex actually got married a second time, and this time round, it actually escalated into a physical abuse on his second wife. So I felt a little guilt in the first place, for if I could have actually reached out to her sooner, perhaps I could have saved her from all this physical abuse. And and as I read out throughout the years, it is usually a precursor. But as what Karen has mentioned earlier, some of the emotional abuse, can actually have a long-term effect on the psychological aspect of the abusee. Right. And so, I did suffer from post-traumatic stress. And for me, I wanted to say that how to actually spot potential emotional or psychological abuse is to look out for red flags. Things like love bombing, for example. Suddenly, the person's come really, really hard and keep telling you that he loves you, or he or she loves you, and always trying to actually try to isolate you away from people that you care about, which is actually a typical trait. And also, gaslighting. Okay, the word gaslighting, I think, would say that, try to actually to screw your mind or manipulate. There are things that the abuser would have said, and then to you, and then you reacted, or you went on to do to do his or her bidding, and then after that it didn't work out, and you will come back and say, why did you tell me to do this? Because you told me to. And then they will try and say no and deny, and then try to justify, and then create a different story in your mind. And then you're trying to actually manipulate your sense of self. That's actually, and the thing is also, as what Martha has actually typed onto the chat box, have to be a bit more aware. Listen with your eyes and listen with your ears open, and then see with your eyes and feel it. Because if it doesn't feel right, trust your instinct, trust your emotions. And jokes, all these little jokes that actually that's targeted at your own physical attributes, at your appearance. All of these jokes, are actually personal, become too personal. That are actually signs as well that you should be actually looking out for. Any belittling, especially belittling that pass off as jokes in front of people that you care about and friends, or using the pretext of I'm doing this for you, because you are the person that I love the most, that I want you to be better. That's why I'm telling you all the hard stuff that nobody dares to tell you, in order for you to change, to be better. Well, love aside, okay, for people who already meant well, they give you constructive feedback. They don't put you down. So these are some of the things that I would like to share. These are the things to look out for in a relationship. And if it didn't feel right, don't compromise. It's very, very important. Know who you really are and what you really want. Martha,
Okay, we have 2 more questions. What advice would you tell your younger self you could go back in time? Karen?
If I could go back in time, what I would say to myself is, don't allow yourself to make decisions based on other people's expectations of you. based on what society says you should do or you should not do, um, and just go with what your heart tells you. You know if you are being disrespected, being belittled, um, being mentally tortured, emotionally abused, and of course physically abused. Um, don't allow anyone to tell you, oh, I did it out of love. It's because you made me angry, but because I love you so much, that's why you deserve all this nonsense, right? So, yeah. So I would tell myself, my younger self, no, don't live up to other people's expectations of you, and doing what they think is right. Do what you think is right for you.
Thank
Take
you,
courage.
Carol.
It's
Oh, sorry to interrupt.
It's
You haven't
okay. No,
finished?
I'm fine. It's just that's the last thing is just that. No, it does take a lot of courage, but it's worth taking the courage.
And as
Carol?
for me, just want to reiterate what I said earlier. Have confidence and know who you are and what you want. Don't, as what Karen said as well, don't compromise, and then don't believe that someone is actually doing this out of love for you, because you can feel it. If it doesn't feel right, if it doesn't sound right, it isn't right.
Okay, how about the one that I just typed?
Okay.
Can couples recover from abusive situations and rebuild healthy relationships, or the past memories stand in the way as obstacles?
In my opinion, it is possible. It's nothing is impossible. It is possible. The question, however, is to what extent are both parties truly willing to work through first their own inner demons, their own personal issues as to why they are the abuser or they allow themselves to be the abusee. When they can deal with honestly and fully their own issues regarding this, then they can then work together to then deal with the issues that they both encounter. What were the triggers for the both of them? And understanding how did they become the person that they are, what got them to that point. Having said that, it's not easy. It's not easy, especially having to deal with your own demons and coming to admit that you, as even as the abusee, right? Even though you're the victim per se, there is also the situation where even as a victim, you also have a responsibility. You also had a part to play in that abusive relationship, right? You allowed yourself to be. I wouldn't say that you consciously say, "Okay, abuse me," right? You don't, unless it's a different scenario. But the fact is that unless you have immediately dealt with it and want to report to police and told them person off, etc., you are continuing on in a long-term relationship in that situation. You also have to admit to having been having some responsibility towards continuing that abusive relationship. So when those issues have been highlighted, discovered, and then willing to honestly work towards rebuilding relationship. Oftentimes the relationship may have to start from scratch again to get to know each other again, and then deciding whether or not to then really give it a go and rebuild the relationship. It's not easy. As for the part where the past memories stand in the way as obstacles, it can, but it's still a choice. It's a choice that you can make to decide whether or not you want to let it be an obstacle or not. Whether you still want it to remain a painful memory and letting the pain get in the way, that is also a choice. You can get help and therapy to help you deal with it and to let it go. There is therapy available for it. But if you choose to hold on to it because maybe you feel justified in feeling the pain and trauma, then maybe you're not ready to rebuild a relationship again.
Yeah, well, as for me, I saw that question as in two folds. If the It says, can couples recover from abusive situations and rebuild a healthy relationship, or the past memory stand in the way as obstacle? So let's say for this couple, being the abuser and the abusee, can they actually move on? If both are on a common ground, definitely it can be done. In theory, in theory, it definitely can be done, because both have to be on common ground, to want to work it through. Because a lot of the times, research have said and have shown that a lot of the abusers, they don't grow up and decide that they want to abuse their partner. They could have gone through certain trauma. So we need to understand that, and if they're willing to be able to want to move on by understanding what was the root cause of their behavior and want to move on together, then yes, it can definitely happen. But as for the individuals like Karen and myself, who have actually gone through this situation, and how do we move on? And just also want to reiterate what Karen, and also add on what Karen had shared. It's very important to invest in yourself first. And at the end of the day, it all comes back to ourselves. Because the reason why an abuse can happen, it takes two to clap. We have to understand, it takes two to clap. So if an abuser is able to actually to do the abusing, is because the abusee allow his or her power to be taken away. So it is important to understand that how not to allow ourselves to give the power away, is to work on ourselves first, invest in personal development. For my own personal healing journey, I was able to understand that to find myself first, you need to know who you really are. Again, find yourself, know what you really, really want. And also, allowing yourself to forgive. I think that's actually very, very important. Those who have actually gone through certain trauma, forgive yourself, because that was the biggest hurdle that I had to go through, had to go past, because I couldn't believe that I allowed myself to be abused. And then having that forgiveness, and then also willingness to let go of the memories. The memories are still there. I mean, I can tell you for a fact that when I was recounting my story earlier, I had memories. I even had vivid images of what happened. And when Martha asked me about about the bedroom, the sex, and with my ex, I remember every single thing, right? But the thing is, it's how to disassociate yourself with your emotion from that whole thing, because it has already passed. And I was able, because reason why I was able to actually meet someone who is actually my equal is not because he gave me that, because I worked on myself first, and I was able to attract my equal. So it is there are memories, there are trigger, but it's just how we want them to guide us in our life. Do we allow the past to hold us back, or are we looking forward? That's the most important thing for me.
Okay, 2 more minutes. Any other questions for our panel? Okay, so I want to try to answer these questions. Can couples recover from abusive situations and rebuild a healthy relationships, or the past memories stand in the way as obstacles? A lot of people hold on to the past, and they are not able to let go of the past because the past actually serves as a protection. And it is very difficult for people to move past. So like what Karen and Carol said, it is possible with difficulties. And often I feel that it's very difficult to do it without facilitated experienced practitioners to help. Most couples think that they have moved past it, but actually they continue in their own dysfunctional way by sweeping it under the carpet, by avoiding it, by not talking about it, by just pretending. And that is not what we are talking about. Empathy building is actually an actual term that needs to happen with people who have narcissistic tendencies. And there are some people, even though I have worked with many, many couples who I find are in really toxic relationships. I do hear of many clients who, when they hear something that they don't like what Karen said, they will just terminate the sessions, because don't forget that they are after all paying for it. And when you go to family service centers, what a lot of people don't know is that in family service centers, what they have are not trained counselors most of the time. What they have are social workers. social workers may not be trained to actually conduct counseling. So this is very tricky because every counselor, even though they call themselves counselor, they are trained differently, and their personalities will also be different, and the rapport will also be different. And so when they say certain things like counseling doesn't work, sometimes it's maybe that practitioner is not the right one. So it is emotionally very exhausting to keep going from practitioner to practitioner. And so when people go to practitioner and they don't like a practitioner, sometimes they don't go to the next practitioner or the next one or the next one. Sometimes they just give up. And because it is emotionally exhausting and expensive to repeat your story again and again. So I have had clients who I feel need a different kind of a practitioner, but they refuse to go anywhere else because they like me, or they don't want to repeat their story, or they don't want to spend any more money, or they don't have money. So it is actually quite challenging. It's very, very challenging. So I always say this, it's much easier to end the relationship and go on to the next one, but harder to stay in the relationship. And it is actually about finding yourself in a toxic relationship that is very difficult. You both of you say, okay, we learned our lessons. Oh, I didn't know you were so hurt. Okay, I'm willing to change. But then one person holding on to the pain, and the other person trying ways and means to bend over backwards and then continue being punished. So sometimes I see it swing the other way, and it takes a while for people to find that equilibrium. And I have seen a toxic relationship by a narcissistic actually work out, but it took a lot of therapy, a lot of very honest, brutal self-awareness and reflection. And I have seen them come out at the end of the tunnel. And it is possible. That's in a nutshell what I'm trying to say. Okay, so any last words from our panel? Last words?
Actually, I just like to highlight the fact that, as you said, Martha, it does take a lot of work. I agree. It is very exhaustive. It takes a lot of effort. But I can tell you this: any effort that you put in, remember, is for yourself. Any amount, anything that you do to improve yourself, to find out more about yourself, to discover yourself, any little bit that's possible is still a move in the right direction. Even if it's 1 cm improvement, that is still 1 cm. If it's 1 millimeter, it is 1 millimeter. Just take care of yourself. I think that's important. Self-love is often used term, but most people don't realize that self-love is not something you just, have some candles and take a bath and so forth. It's really taking the time and effort to learn to be and to discover who you really are and feel comfortable and happy in your own skin in who you are. So the other thing that Carol also mentioned is self-forgiveness. I think that's one of the hardest things to do. You are most probably able to forgive anybody under the world, but you find it the most difficult to forgive yourself because you're always the most self-critical. So it does take courage. It does take a lot of determination, but I can tell you that it is worth every single bit. So please go find yourself a practitioner or any form of therapy that can help you to discover yourself. Right? Not them discovering for you, but for them to help you to discover yourself and to heal yourself.
Well,
Carol?
whereas for me, thank you, Karen. Whereas for me, besides what Karen has said, it is something that I would 100% recommend and advocate. Find someone and work on yourself first. But most importantly, is surround yourself with a support system. We are, for us human, we're destined. It is us. It is human to live within a community and seek support. Even if you feel that if you need to feel down and you need some kind of a boost of confidence, ask for compliment, and that was actually one of the healing as well that you can do, because we are usually our own worst critic. We don't say nice things to ourselves. That's why self-love is so important. The thing is, if you have doubts, ask the people that are around you that you trust. What is it that you love about me? What is lovable about me? And if you're able to see that from their perspective, then you're able to be able to grow as a person. That is such an important. So that would be my parting words for all of you. Seek support and know that you have support always. Thank you.
Okay, thank you everybody for being here. So just like to read what Dani wrote. I love this panel a lot. It takes courage to share and be vulnerable to us and the others who will be watching this. You are such amazing people. Much love to both of you. So thank you very much, Karen and Carol. Thank you. Thank you everybody who stayed, and thank you for those who shared. Thanks, Dani, for posting the link. Trisha writing, thank you, Carol and Karen, for sharing such personal short story. It's empowering for those to learn about abusive relationship and that there are options. Yes. And thank you for reliving your past and sharing about sex. That's something that actually I'm sure a lot of people are curious about, but we don't get to ask victims. So thank you so much. I will stop the recording now. Thank you.